Welcome to Folktales. What happens when the most anticipated wedding of the year becomes the most scandalous night in two families' history? Tonight, we uncover the shocking truth that made a bride freeze at her husband's doorstep, revealing a secret so devastating it would shake an entire community forever. The gleaming towers of Lagos reflected the setting sun as Adanna Okafor stepped out of her white Rolls-Royce, her Vera Wang gown trailing behind her like liquid silk. Today was meant to be perfect, the merger of two of Nigeria's most powerful business dynasties through marriage. Her father, Chief Emeka Okafor, owned half the oil wells in the Niger Delta, while her groom's family, the Nwokoyes, controlled the largest banking empire in West Africa. This wasn't just a wedding, it was a corporate alliance worth billions. Guests in tailored Armani suits and designer Ankara fabrics filled the opulent ballroom of the Four Points Hotel, their jewelry catching the light from crystal chandeliers. Adanna's heart pounded beneath her custom-fitted bodice as she spotted her groom, Chukwuemeka Nwokoye, standing at the altar in his midnight blue Tom Ford tuxedo. His smile was perfect, his posture confident, but something in his eyes made her stomach flutter with unease. She had known him only 6 months, an arrangement their fathers had orchestrated over aged whiskey and business contracts. Love was supposed to grow, they said. Respect would be enough to begin with. As traditional drums mixed with a live orchestra, Adanna walked down the aisle lined with white roses and gold accents. Her mother's diamond tiara caught every camera flash from the society photographers documenting Nigeria's wedding of the decade. The couple exchanged vows written by their family's lawyers, promising not just love, but corporate loyalty. When they kissed, champagne flutes rose in celebration of what everyone believed would be an unstoppable union. But as night fell and guests prepared for the reception, Adanna noticed her new husband's hand trembling as he helped her into their limousine, heading to his penthouse for their wedding night. Chukwuemeka's penthouse overlooked Victoria Island's glittering skyline, a testament to new money meeting old traditions. The living room was decorated with fresh orchids and traditional Igbo artifacts worth millions, while floor-to-ceiling windows showcased Lagos's bustling nightlife below. Adanna had changed from her wedding gown into a flowing silk nightgown her mother had chosen, complete with family jewelry passed down through generations. She should have felt like a princess, but the weight of her gold bangles suddenly felt like chains. As they entered the master bedroom, Chukwuemeka poured 2 glasses of expensive cognac, his hands still shaking. "Adanna," he began, his voice heavy with an emotion she couldn't identify. "There's something we need to discuss before we begin our life together." The room was bathed in soft lamplight, expensive art adorning the walls, but the atmosphere felt suffocating. She noticed his family photos on the nightstand, generations of successful Nwokoyes in their finest attire, including one that made her blood run cold. "Who is that woman?" Adanna whispered, pointing to an elderly lady in traditional dress standing beside a young man who looked remarkably like her own father. Chukwuemeka followed her gaze and nearly dropped his glass. "That's my great-grandmother, Mama Ngozi, with her brother." His voice trailed off as recognition dawned on both their faces. The family resemblance was unmistakable, and suddenly, pieces of conversations they'd overheard at family gatherings began forming a terrifying picture. Their eyes met across the room, both understanding simultaneously that their perfect union might be built on something far more complicated than business arrangements. The next morning brought no relief, only more questions that demanded answers. Adanna sat in her family's marble-floored study, surrounded by generations of Okafor achievements, oil contracts, political appointments, and family portraits that now seemed to mock her. Her father, Chief Emeka, paced behind his massive mahogany desk, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled. "There are things about our family history that we never discussed," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. things that happened long before you were born, during the Civil War years. The revelation came in fragments, stories of survival, of two families who had been closer than anyone remembered. During the Biafran War in the late 1960s, the Okafors and Nwokoyes had fled their villages together, sharing resources and protecting each other's children. Mama Ngozi Nwokoye had married into the family, but before that, she had been born Mama Ngozi Okafor, Adanna's great-grandmother's sister. The families had been bound not just by business over the decades, but by blood that had been forgotten in the pursuit of wealth and status. But Papa, Adanna's voice cracked as she stood among the luxury that suddenly felt meaningless. That means Chukwuemeka and I are... She couldn't finish the sentence. Her father's silence was answer enough. Their designer wedding, the merger contracts, the future they had planned, everything was crumbling around them like sand. The same bloodline that had survived war and built empires had unknowingly orchestrated a union that traditional Igbo customs would never allow. As the morning sun streamed through bulletproof windows, Adanna realized her fairy tale wedding had become a nightmare that would require either devastating sacrifice or unthinkable defiance. In the opulent living room of the Nwokoye mansion, two women sat across from each other, their designer handbags and gold jewelry unable to mask the fear in their eyes. Adanna's mother, Mrs. Chioma Okafor, adjusted her Hermes scarf nervously, while Chukwuemeka's mother, Mrs. Ifeoma Nwokoye, poured tea into bone china cups with hands that betrayed her composure. Both women had suspected the truth for months, but had chosen their children's happiness and their family's business interests over uncomfortable revelations. "We have to tell them before they discover it themselves," Chioma whispered, her voice breaking the silence of the lavishly decorated room. The walls were lined with contemporary African art worth millions, but the atmosphere was heavy with guilt and regret. Ifeoma shook her head, her perfectly styled hair catching the morning light filtering through silk curtains. "If we tell them now, both families will be ruined. The business deals, the reputation, the merger, everything our husbands have worked for will collapse overnight." The women had found the truth in old family documents while planning the wedding, buried among birth certificates and marriage records from decades past. Their children shared great-grandparents, making them second cousins according to traditional counting. In modern Nigeria, such relationships might be overlooked in some circles, but in their traditional Igbo culture, it was taboo that could bring shame to both dynasties. As expensive cars honked in the compound outside, both mothers realized they faced an impossible choice: protect their children from a forbidden union or protect their families from social and financial ruin. The weight of their decision pressed down like the humid Lagos air, suffocating and inescapable. Adanna couldn't sleep. Her silk pajamas clung to her skin in the air-conditioned penthouse as she sat at Chukwuemeka's laptop, researching their family histories online. Her husband of one day lay restless beside her, occasionally mumbling names from their conversation the night before. She had found genealogy websites, newspaper archives, and even social media photos that painted a clearer picture of their intertwined heritage. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. By dawn, they had uncovered not just blood relations, but a web of connections that spanned decades. Their grandfathers had been business partners during Nigeria's independence era. Their great-grandmothers had been sisters who had taken different paths after the Civil War, and their families had maintained contact through various business ventures over the years. What they had thought was a strategic alliance arranged by ambitious fathers was actually a reunion orchestrated by fate, or perhaps by elders who remembered more than they had revealed. "We need proof," Chukwuemeka declared as he joined her. At the marble breakfast bar, his usually perfect hair disheveled and his designer pajamas wrinkled. They spent the morning making discreet phone calls to elderly relatives, visiting family lawyers who kept detailed records, and even hiring a private investigator who specialized in corporate family trees. Each conversation brought more confirmation of their worst fears. Their wedding rings, still new and gleaming, felt like shackles as they realized they might be bound by law to a union that traditional culture would condemn. The luxury surrounding them, imported furniture, original paintings, and views of Africa's most expensive real estate, suddenly felt like a gilded prison. The WhatsApp groups buzzed with speculation before either family was ready for exposure. High society Lagos was smaller than most people realized, especially among families with deep roots and long memories. Mrs. Aduni Bakari, society matriarch and keeper of genealogical gossip, had noticed the resemblance during the wedding reception and had spent the weekend researching. By Monday morning, her findings were spreading through exclusive social clubs, corporate boardrooms, and traditional family compounds across the city. "Have you heard about the Okafor Nwokoye wedding?" became the whispered greeting at the Ikoyi Club, the Lagos Country Club, and even in the VIP sections of high-end churches across the state. The story grew with each telling, some claiming it was a deliberate power move by the patriarchs, others suggesting it was divine punishment for families that had prioritized wealth over tradition. Adanna's phone rang constantly with calls from concerned friends, curious colleagues, and family members demanding explanations. The business implications became clear when stock prices for both family companies began fluctuating wildly. Investors were uncertain about deals involving families whose judgment could be questioned, while competitors seized the opportunity to spread doubt about the merger's legitimacy. Traditional rulers from their ancestral communities requested meetings, religious leaders called for clarification, and even government officials who had business relationships with both families began distancing themselves. In the marble lobbies of Lagos's most exclusive towers, the Okafor Nwokoye union had become the scandal that threatened to topple two of Nigeria's most powerful dynasties. The couple found themselves at the center of a storm that extended far, beyond their personal lives into the very foundations of their families' empires. The emergency meeting convened at the Okafor family compound in Victoria Island, a sprawling estate that normally hosted celebrations and business negotiations. Tonight, it felt more like a courtroom. The combined extended families gathered in the main reception hall, elders in traditional clothing mixed with younger relatives in expensive Western attire. The atmosphere was tense enough to cut with a blade, expensive jewelry and designer watches catching the light as nervous hands fidgeted. Chief Emeka Okafor and Chief Adanna Nwokoye sat at the head of the room, two titans of industry reduced to uncomfortable patriarchs facing the consequences of forgotten history. Between them sat the eldest members of both clans, ancient women in elaborate head ties and men whose faces bore the wisdom and burden of decades. These elders remembered stories the younger generations had dismissed as irrelevant folklore, tales that now threatened to unravel everything their children and grandchildren had built. "Speak the truth, Emeka," commanded Mama Adaizi, the eldest Okafor matriarch, her voice carrying authority that made million-dollar executives shift uncomfortably in their seats. "We know what you discovered. We know what your children have married into." The room fell silent except for the hum of air conditioning and the distant sound of Lagos traffic. Chief Emeka's expensive suit seemed inadequate armor against his grandmother's piercing gaze. As he began to recount the evidence they had uncovered, gasps and murmurs filled the room. Traditional kola nuts remained untouched on silver platters. As the revelation unfolded, the marriage was not just business. It was the reunion of blood that should never have been separated by matrimony, no matter how much wealth and power it promised to consolidate. The judgment came swiftly and without room for negotiation. According to Igbo traditional law, as interpreted by the eldest women present, the marriage was null and void from the moment the blood relationship was confirmed. Mama Adaizi stood, slowly, her expensive jewelry gleaming as she raised her walking stick, a symbol of her authority that commanded respect from billionaires and paupers alike. "This union cannot stand," she declared, her voice echoing in the marble-floored hall. "The ancestors themselves have revealed this truth to prevent an abomination." But the elders faced a modern dilemma that their traditions hadn't anticipated. The marriage was legal according to Nigerian civil law, binding business contracts had been signed, and the public nature of the wedding made quiet dissolution nearly impossible. Moreover, both families had invested millions in the ceremony. The merger, and the future plans that now lay in ruins, the younger family members, educated in London, New York, and Lagos's finest institutions, struggled to reconcile traditional beliefs with contemporary legal and social realities. What about our love? Chukwuemeka stood suddenly, his voice breaking the formal proceedings. His Tom Ford suit was rumpled from sleepless nights, but his eyes blazed with defiance. What about our choice to be together despite this revelation? Adanna reached for his hand, her designer clothes and perfect makeup unable to hide the anguish in her face. The room erupted in heated discussions as traditional values clashed with modern sensibilities, old customs battled new realities, and two young people found themselves caught between the world they knew and the one their ancestors demanded they respect. The crystal chandeliers above seemed to tremble with the weight of a decision that would reshape two of Nigeria's most powerful families forever. The family split became inevitable as the days passed. Half supported the elders' traditional stance, while the other half advocated for the couple's right to choose their destiny regardless of ancestral connections. The schism cut through both. Families like a sword, dividing brothers from sisters, parents from children, and business partners from lifelong allies. Corporate boardrooms that once echoed with unified vision now hosted heated arguments about reputation, tradition, and the price of defying cultural norms. Adanna's younger brother, Kelechi, flew in from Harvard Business School to support his sister's choice, while her older sister, Amara, sided with the traditionalists, fearing the shame would destroy their family's standing in society. Similarly, Chukwuemeka's siblings took opposing sides, his brother Emeka supporting tradition, while his sister Chidinma argued for love over lineage. The penthouses and mansions that had once been gathering places for family celebration became battlegrounds where expensive suits and traditional attire faced off in emotional confrontations that threatened to tear both dynasties apart. The business. Implications grew more serious daily. Joint ventures worth hundreds of millions hung in the balance as partners and investors questioned the family's stability. International collaborators postponed deals, local competitors circled like vultures, and the media began investigating the story that promised to be the scandal of the decade. In glass towers overlooking Lagos, executives in tailored suits made contingency plans while their bosses, the patriarchs who had built empires, watched their carefully constructed legacies crumble over a love story that had become a cultural battleground. The young couple found themselves not just fighting for their relationship, but for the very future of everything their families had achieved. The story broke simultaneously across multiple platforms, orchestrated by investigative journalists who had been tracking the rumors for weeks. Billion Naira families in forbidden marriage scandal screamed the headline of This Day newspaper, while social media exploded with hashtags Forbidden Union and Church Tradition vs Love. The couple's wedding photos, once symbols of hope and unity, became evidence in court of public opinion, analyzed and dissected by everyone from traditional rulers to modern feminists. Television stations competed for exclusive interviews, offering millions for access to family members willing to break their silence. The couple retreated deeper into Chukwuemeka's penthouse, watching their lives dissected on breakfast shows and evening news programs. Celebrity bloggers, society photographers, and even international media picked up the story, fascinated by the collision of ancient traditions with contemporary wealth and power. Their faces appeared on magazine covers across West Africa, their love story twisted into a cautionary tale about the dangers of forgetting one's roots. The pressure mounted as religious leaders weighed in from pulpits across the country, some supporting tradition while others preached about love conquering all obstacles. Social media became a battlefield where family friends, business associates, and complete strangers debated the couple's fate with passionate intensity. Corporate sponsors began withdrawing from events associated with both families, while others saw opportunity in the controversy. In air-conditioned boardrooms and traditional family compounds alike, the question became not just whether the marriage could survive, but whether the families themselves would emerge intact from the storm that their children's love had unleashed. The confrontation that would determine everything took place in the opulent conference room of the Nwokoye corporate headquarters, 30 floors above Lagos's bustling streets. Every family member who mattered was present, from the eldest matriarchs, in elaborate traditional dress to the youngest cousins in designer suits, fresh from universities abroad. The mahogany table that usually hosted billion naira deals now served as a battlefield for a family's soul, with Adanna and Chukwuemeka sitting at its center like defendants awaiting judgment. Chief Emeka stood first, his usual commanding presence diminished by weeks of stress and sleepless nights. His expensive suit hung loosely on his frame as he addressed the assembled families. "We built our wealth and power by respecting both tradition and progress," he began, his voice heavy with the weight of leadership. "But now we face a choice that will define not just our children's future, but the legacy we leave behind." The room was silent except for the soft hum of air conditioning and the distant sound of Lagos traffic far below. Then Adanna rose, her designer dress and perfect jewelry unable to mask the determination burning in her eyes. "With respect to our elders and love for our families," she said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands, "we choose each other. We choose to honor our heritage while writing our own destiny." The room erupted as supporters and opponents voiced their reactions, expensive handbags and briefcases forgotten as emotions boiled over. Traditional walking sticks pointed accusingly, while manicured fingers gestured frantically. Diamond jewelry caught the light as heads shook in disbelief or nodded in support, and two of Nigeria's most powerful families discovered that all their wealth and influence couldn't solve the crisis their children's hearts had created. The young couple's decision came with a cost that extended far beyond their personal lives. Both families agreed to honor their choice, but the price was exile from the traditional inheritance and leadership roles they had been groomed to fill. Chukwuemeka would step down from his position as heir apparent to the banking empire, while Adanna would forfeit her place in the family oil business. Their names would remain in family records, but their children would carry the burden of the controversy for generations to come. The business implications were severe, but not devastating. Other family members stepped forward to fill leadership roles. New partnerships were forged to replace damaged relationships, and both empires adapted to survive the scandal that had threatened their foundations. The merger that had originally brought them together was restructured as a professional alliance rather than a family union, separating business interests from personal choices in ways their cultures had rarely allowed. In their penthouse sanctuary, Adanna and Chukwuemeka faced their future with a mixture of triumph and sorrow. They had won the right to be together, but lost the safety net of family support and generational wealth that had defined their entire lives. Their designer clothes and expensive jewelry would be maintained by their own efforts rather than inherited. Privilege. Their children would build new legacies rather than inheriting established ones, and their love would be tested by challenges no amount of family money could solve. As they looked out over Lagos's glittering skyline, they understood that choosing love over tradition meant choosing an uncertain future over a predetermined destiny. But they faced it together, bound by choice rather than expectation. 2 years later, Adanna and Chukwuemeka stood in the garden of their modest but elegant home in Lekki Phase 1, a far cry from the palatial estates they had grown up in, but rich with the warmth of a love they had fought to preserve. Their wedding. Anniversary party was intimate. Close friends, supportive family members, and colleagues who had stood by them through the scandal. Gone were the crystal chandeliers and marble floors, replaced by contemporary African art and comfortable furniture. that reflected their new identity as a couple who had chosen their own path. Their business ventures had flourished beyond expectation. Free from the weight of family dynasties, they had launched a technology company that specialized in connecting traditional African businesses with global markets. Their success came not from inherited wealth, but from the determination and creativity that their struggle had fostered. Investors who had initially avoided them due to the scandal now sought them out as symbols of successful change and adaptation in modern Africa. The traditional families had eventually reconciled with their choice, if not fully embraced it. Grandchildren had a way of healing old wounds, and the birth of their daughter, Amaka Okafor Nwokoye, had softened even the hardest traditional hearts. The child carried both family names as a bridge between old customs and new realities, her very existence proof that love could indeed triumph over tradition when coupled with courage and sacrifice. As they watched their daughter play in the garden where fragrant flowers bloomed despite challenging soil, Adanna and Chukwuemeka understood that some victories required generations to fully appreciate, but the choice to fight for love, even when it cost everything, remained the foundation of every great story worth telling. If you enjoyed this story, then like, subscribe, and share this story with your loved ones. Also, tell us in the comments where you are watching from.